A map can hold a secret for 500 years. This video reveals 20 ancient maps that show lands before they were officially discovered, challenging everything we think we know about history. By the end, you will see the world not as a blank space slowly filled in, but as a place our ancestors may have known in startling detail long before the history books say they could. How did a 16th century admiral draw an ice-free Antarctica? What lost voyages are recorded only in cryptic lines on vellum? We are about to journey through these cartographic enigmas, from a chart that names America before Columbus sailed to a Korean world map that outlined Africa with uncanny precision. Each one is a puzzle piece in a story of forgotten exploration and knowledge that somehow slipped through the cracks of time. What does it mean when the old maps seem to know more than the mapmakers themselves? But we must first understand the world these mapmakers lived in. The age of exploration, from the 15th to the 17th centuries, is the grand story we all know, of brave captains and tall ships finally filling in the blank spaces on the globe. Yet the maps we are about to see whisper a different, more mysterious tale. They suggest that many of those blank spaces were not so blank at all, that the unknown world was, in some profound way, already known. To hear that whisper, we need to step back and see the map not as we see it today, a precise scientific instrument, but as our ancestors saw it. For centuries, a map was a tapestry woven from many threads. It was a spiritual diagram, a collection of travelers' tales, a record of trade routes guarded like state secrets, and sometimes a vessel for pure myth. The great medieval world maps, called Mappa Mundi, often placed Jerusalem at the center, surrounded by strange beasts and legendary kingdoms at the edges of the earth. They were less about geography and more about a worldview, a map of faith and story. Then there were the Portolan charts used by real sailors navigating the Mediterranean. These were practical, starkly different, drawn on sheepskin with lines radiating from compass roses, detailing coastlines with a startling accuracy that still impresses modern cartographers. They were copied, amended, and passed from ship to ship, master to apprentice, accumulating knowledge over generations. This is the crucial point. The mapmaker at his desk was rarely an explorer. He was a compiler, a synthesizer. He worked with whatever sources he could find, ancient texts from Greece and Rome, accounts from Arab traders, sketches from returning mariners, and yes, even older, unexplained charts that might have been in a library for 100 years. His masterpiece was a collage of data, some fresh, some ancient, some rumor, and some fact. The materials themselves tell a story of fragile knowledge. Maps were drawn on vellum, precious and durable, but each copy was a monumental effort. A single mistake, or a deliberate choice to leave out a secret trade route, could alter what was passed down. When we look at one of these 20 enigmatic maps, we are not just looking at a snapshot of what one person believed. We are looking at the potential echo of a much older understanding, a geographical truth that survived its own discovery, hidden in plain sight within the lines and place names of a new creation. It is within this rich, layered context of memory, secrecy, and inherited wisdom that our real mystery begins. In the quiet halls of Istanbul's Topkapi Palace, a discovery was made in 1929 that would send shockwaves through the world of cartography. Archivists sorting through old documents uncovered a fragment of a world map drawn on gazelle skin, dated to the year 1513. It was the work of an Ottoman admiral and cartographer named Piri Reis. At first glance, it was a beautiful artifact of its age, showing the familiar coasts of Europe and Africa. But as scholars looked closer, they saw something impossible. There, stretching below the Atlantic, was a landmass with a coastline of startling detail. A coastline that modern science would not begin to map with such precision for another 400 years. It appeared to be the continent of Antarctica, but not as we know it, buried under miles of ice. This was Antarctica seemingly depicted as a land free of its glacial cap, a geographical condition that last existed on our planet tens of millions of years ago. How could a 16th century admiral, whose own culture had no record of southern polar exploration, possibly know this? Piri Reis himself left notes on the map, providing a rare and candid glimpse into his sources. He wrote that he had consulted some 20 different charts and world maps, including those from the time of Alexander the Great, and even what he called the maps of the infidels from the West, likely referring to Portuguese and Spanish charts. He was a compiler pulling together the cutting-edge geographical knowledge of his day, yet the inclusion of this mysterious southern land defies all those sources. No known European expedition had sailed that far south by 1513. The very existence of a continent at the South Pole was not confirmed until the 19th century. So what was he looking at? Cartographic historians are deeply divided. Some propose he had access to now lost Portuguese voyages, secrets held tightly by rival empires. Others point to his reference to ancient sources, suggesting the map preserves a sliver of knowledge from classical antiquity, a forgotten understanding passed down through copies of copies. The most controversial theory suggests the map's ultimate source is far older, a legacy from a prehistoric civilization with seafaring capabilities we have yet to uncover. Beyond the polar mystery, the map's accuracy in other areas adds to its credibility. The eastern coast of South America is rendered with remarkable correctness, its bulge and contours clearly identifiable, suggesting Piri Reis was working with high-quality, first-hand navigational data for known regions. This makes the unknown southern continent all the more perplexing. It was not a simple cartographer's fantasy tucked in a corner. It was integrated with the same careful line work as the rest of the map. The controversies it sparked in the 20th century ranged from the scholarly to the sensational, with some voices even proposing it as evidence for advanced ancient technology or influences from beyond our world. While most academics dismiss these extreme views, they acknowledge the core enigma remains. The Piri Reis map presents us with a profound question about the preservation of knowledge. Is it possible that a truth about our planet's geography, known in some distant epoch, survived for millennia not in books or stories but in the silent lines on a map, waiting in an imperial library for its moment to be seen again? This single fragment challenges the linear story of discovery, suggesting our past might be filled with forgotten chapters of global awareness. The Piri Reis fragment suggests whispers of lost worlds, but another map emerged centuries later with a claim so bold it threatened to rewrite a cornerstone of history. In 1965, a rare book dealer presented a small, unassuming parchment map to the world. Dated to around 1440, it depicted Europe, Africa, and Asia in a familiar medieval style. But in the distant northwest Atlantic, across a vast ocean, it showed two large islands. One was labeled Grönlanda, Greenland. The other, farther west, bore a name that stunned historians, Vinland Insula. This was the Vinland map, and it purported to show a part of North America, known as Vinland from the Viking sagas, a full half-century before Christopher Columbus was even born. The map was immediately engulfed in a firestorm of controversy that has never fully subsided. Was this the single most important cartographic discovery of the 20th century, or was it an exquisite and cunning forgery? The battle over its authenticity has been fought not in libraries, but in laboratories. Initial examinations of the parchment suggested it was genuinely medieval. The problem lay in the ink. Advanced analysis revealed the presence of a modern compound, anatase, a form of titanium dioxide not commercially available until the 1920s. This seemed to be the smoking gun, proof of a 20th century creation. Yet, later studies complicated the story. suggesting the anatase could have formed naturally from other ingredients in medieval ink, or might even be a contaminant from later preservation attempts. Each new round of scientific testing seems to produce contradictory results, leaving the academic world deeply divided. Historians who argue for forgery point to the map's suspiciously convenient timing, emerging just as public interest in Viking exploration was surging. They see it as a masterful hoax, perhaps created to enhance the value of the medieval manuscript it was found with, a clever pastiche of genuine historical knowledge about Norse voyages woven into a fake artifact. On the other side are scholars who believe the map could be genuine, a 15th century copy of a much older Norse original. They argue it represents cartographic evidence of knowledge that was circulating quietly among certain European scholars and clerics, knowledge passed down from the Viking expeditions of Leif Erikson some 400 years prior. The sagas tell of his journey around the year 1000, of landing on a shores rich with wild grapes and timber, a place he called Vinland. The map's depiction of Greenland is remarkably accurate for its presumed time, showing it as an island, a fact not confirmed by Europeans until the 19th century. This accuracy lends a strange credibility to its portrayal of the mysterious Vinland to the southwest. If the map is real, its implications are profound. It would mean that on the eve of Columbus's voyage, at least some European intellectuals had a concrete, if vague, understanding that there was land across the Atlantic. It would not diminish Columbus's achievement as a navigator, but it would completely reshape our understanding of the informational world he sailed from. He may not have been venturing into a complete void, but toward a place already named in forgotten charts. The enduring mystery of the Vinland map forces us to confront the very nature of historical proof. It sits on that razor-thin line between a groundbreaking discovery and a tantalizing illusion, a testament to how a single piece of parchment can hold the power to unsettle our entire narrative of discovery, if only we could decide if its message is truth or temptation. The line between a sailor's tall tale and a navigator's secret chart is often thinner than the parchment it's drawn on. In 1558, a Venetian nobleman named Niccolo Zeno published a map and a series of letters that would fuel centuries of speculation. He claimed they were based on the voyages of his ancestors, the Zeno brothers, who had sailed the North Atlantic 200 years earlier in the late 1300s. The map they supposedly inspired is a cartographic curiosity, depicting a cluster of detailed islands with strange names: Friesland, Estatiland, Icaria, and Drogeo, sitting in the ocean between Europe and a vaguely drawn North America. For generations, mapmakers treated these lands as real, copying them onto their own charts and sending explorers in search of phantoms. Yet, within this apparent fantasy, modern scholars see something more intriguing, a possible echo of genuine pre-Columbian knowledge. The Zeno map's portrayal of Greenland is its most compelling feature. It shows the massive island not as a vague blob, but with a distinctly accurate shape, including a prominent eastern peninsula that aligns with reality. This was a level of detail far beyond typical European maps of the 1550s. How could a map supposedly based on 14th century voyages get Greenland so right, while also populating the sea with islands that do not exist? The answer may lie in the nature of medieval knowledge transmission. Experts analyzing the map suggest it is likely a compilation, a patchwork sewn together from different sources. The accurate Greenland could very well be drawn from genuine Norse sailing charts or first-hand accounts from that sustained Viking colony. The Norse had been living in Greenland for centuries by the time the Zeno brothers supposedly sailed, and their knowledge of its coastline was intimate and practical. This real geographic data, then, might have been stitched together with fragments of other sailors' reports, misunderstood landmarks, and pure legend from the rich tradition of Atlantic folklore. Places like the wealthy island of Estatiland, described in the accompanying narrative as a land with sophisticated libraries and Latin-speaking people, could be a wildly embellished account of a Norse encounter with the indigenous peoples of Newfoundland or Labrador. The mysterious Friesland, which appeared on maps for over 200 years, might have been a misplacement of the Faroe Islands or even a persistent mirage caused by atmospheric conditions. The map's enduring influence is a testament to its persuasive power. Later explorers, including the renowned Martin Frobisher, carried copies and searched in vain for the Zeno Islands, their expeditions shaped by this blend of fact and fiction. This ongoing quest to identify the real-world anchors for its mythical names forces us to ask a fascinating question. What if myth is not the opposite of history but its shadow? What if every persistent legend, from wealthy islands to lost cities, begins with a kernel of truth, a real voyage, a real coastline seen through fog and storm, that over generations of retelling is transformed into something marvelous and strange? The Zeno map does not give us a clear picture of the past. Instead, it gives us a glimpse into the process of memory itself, where geography and story become inseparable, and where the most enduring mysteries are those woven from threads of both reality and dream. While the Zeno map blurred legend and coastline, a different kind of map was being drawn in the shadows, one where every line was a state secret. In the year 1502, a man named Alberto Cantino, an agent for the Duke of Ferrara in Italy, performed an act of high-stakes espionage. He did not steal jewels or weapons, he smuggled a map. This document, now known as the Cantino Planisphere, was illicitly copied from the master chart in the closely guarded Casa da India in Lisbon, the very heart of Portugal's burgeoning maritime empire. Its creation was a clandestine mission to deliver the latest geographical intelligence to a rival Italian patron. What makes this map so extraordinary is its breathtaking immediacy. It shows the coast of Brazil in remarkable detail, a land officially discovered by the Portuguese explorer Pedro Álvares Cabral just 2 years earlier in 1500. This was not ancient knowledge rediscovered. This was a live update from the frontier of the known world, captured and stolen at incredible speed. The map's precision is a testament to the ruthless efficiency of Portuguese exploration. Their caravels were not just ships, they were floating surveying instruments, and their captains were under strict orders to chart every bay and river mouth with meticulous care. The Cantino Planisphere captures this data in stunning form, presenting the hump of Brazil with an accuracy that would not be surpassed for decades. Beyond Brazil, the map reveals another layer of geopolitical intrigue. Drawn boldly across the Atlantic is the Tordesillas Meridian, the line established by treaty in 1494, dividing the unexplored world between Spain and Portugal. This line was not just ink on parchment, it was a legal claim to half the planet. By including it, the mapmaker was not merely drawing geography, he was drawing a blueprint for imperial ambition, showing exactly where his patrons believed their divine right to conquest began and ended. The wealth of detail extends to West Africa, depicting the Gulf of Guinea with its distinctive elbow shape and naming specific kingdoms and trade ports that were sources of gold, ivory, and other goods. The Caribbean islands, recently encountered by Columbus, are also carefully placed. This map is a snapshot of a world being transformed at a dizzying pace, where a single voyage could redraw the entire commercial and political landscape of Europe. It forces us to confront the reality that for these competing powers, cartography was the highest form of intelligence. A map like Cantino's was more valuable than a shipload of spice because it told you where to send the next 10 ships. This secretive, competitive frenzy makes you wonder about all the knowledge that did not survive. How many charts drawn from the logs of unnamed sailors were worn to pieces on rolling decks or deliberately destroyed to protect a trade monopoly? The Cantino Planisphere survived by sheer luck, a stolen copy that escaped the vault. It stands as a brilliant, stolen glimpse into a moment when the modern world was being drafted in real time, reminding us that for every map that made it to a library, countless others vanished, their secrets perhaps absorbed silently into the lines of the next generation's charts, their original discoverers forever lost to history. While spies stole maps in Lisbon, a German scholar was creating one that would literally name a new world. In a small town in the year 1507, a cartographer named Martin Waldseemüller and his colleagues published a work of breathtaking ambition. Their map, a large wall chart composed of 12 separate panels, did something no document had ever done before. In the southern continent across the Atlantic, it printed a new name, America, honoring the explorer Amerigo Vespucci. And to the west of that landmass, it showed a vast, empty ocean separate from the Atlantic. This was the Pacific, depicted a full 6 years before the Spanish explorer Vasco Núñez de Balboa would become the first European to lay eyes upon it from a peak in Panama. How could they have known? The Waldseemüller map is a stunning artifact of intellectual courage, a moment when the mapmaker's pen ventured far beyond the safe shores of confirmed data. Its projection was revolutionary, designed as gauze or elongated strips that could be cut out and pasted onto a sphere to form a globe. This was not just a flat picture, it was a template for a new model of the entire planet. The map masterfully wove together ancient authority with shocking new reports. It still relied on the classical geography of Ptolemy for the Old World, but for the new, it turned to the recent letters of Amerigo Vespucci, which described his voyages along the eastern coast of South America. Vespucci's accounts, which framed these lands as a new world and not part of Asia, gave Waldseemüller the conceptual breakthrough he needed. The result is a fascinating hybrid. The outline of South America is rendered with a startling, almost modern accuracy, its distinctive western curve clearly suggested. Yet, with no European having sailed those waters, the western coastline is pure conjecture, a thin, speculative line drawn from theory. This is where the map transcends mere chart-making and becomes a work of cosmology. Scholars see it as a pivotal hinge between two worldviews. The medieval mind saw the Earth as a known, finite space framed by faith. The modern mind would see it as an unknown, measurable globe to be conquered. Waldseemüller's map is the moment of transition, where the old frameworks strained to contain the new reports, and the mapmaker had to invent a geography to fit a new reality. That speculative western coast and the vast ocean he placed beyond it represent an incredible leap of logic. Perhaps it was brilliant intuition, reasoning that such a large landmass must have another shore. Or perhaps, as some researchers quietly suggest, it was a hint gleaned from whispers of other voyages, rumors of a great sea to the west that had filtered back through indigenous networks or lost Portuguese charts. The map's own history adds to its mystery. Only one original copy is known to have survived, discovered by chance in a German castle library in the 19th century. And in a fascinating twist, Waldseemüller himself seemed to have second thoughts. In later maps, he removed the name America, retreating to a more conservative view. But the name had already been set adrift on the tide of printing, destined to stick forever. This map forces us to confront a profound idea, that sometimes to see the truth of the world, you must first have the courage to draw it. The courage to draw a new world gave way to a different kind of audacity, the courage to map a land no one had ever seen. Nearly 230 years after Waldseemüller, a French geographer named Philippe Buache presented a map to the Academy of Sciences in Paris that seemed to defy all logic of his time. It was the year 1737, and the continent of Antarctica remained a total mystery, a vast blank labeled Terra Australis Incognita on most charts, a place of pure speculation. Yet Buache's map depicted it not as a vague shape, but in startlingly specific detail. He showed the southern continent as two large landmasses, separated by a wide, navigable sea that cut straight through from one side to the other. He even included mountain ranges and river systems. His peers dismissed it as a flight of fancy, a theoretical exercise with no basis in observation. For over a century, that judgment seemed correct. Then, in the mid-20th century, something extraordinary happened. Modern technology, using seismic surveys and ice-penetrating radar, began to map the actual bedrock of Antarctica, the land that lies beneath miles of solid ice. The results were a shock. The subglacial topography revealed a continent that is, in fact, composed of two major landmasses. East Antarctica is a single, massive continental shield, while West Antarctica is a collection of smaller landmasses. And dividing them is a vast, deep basin. If the ice were removed, this basin would indeed form a major sea passage. Buache's theoretical map from 1737 bore an uncanny, almost impossible resemblance to the reality hidden under the ice. How could he have possibly known this? Buache was not a mystic, he was a respected academic, the king's geographer. His method was unique. He believed the world's mountain ranges and river basins formed interconnected systems, and he used this theory to predict the layout of unknown lands. But the precision of his Antarctic vision suggests something more than just a lucky guess from a drawing board theory. In his own writings, Buache stated he had consulted ancient sources, though he was never specific about which ones. This has led to a compelling and controversial line of inquiry. Could his work have been influenced by lost maps from a much earlier era, charts that depicted Antarctica not as it is today, but as it was in a distant, ice-free past? Proponents of this idea point to ancient maritime cultures like the Phoenicians, legendary sailors whose records have almost entirely vanished. Is it conceivable that a global seafaring culture, thousands of years ago, possessed the knowledge and skill to map coastlines that would later vanish under glaciers? The Buache map sits at a fascinating crossroads. For some, it is a stunning example of scientific intuition, where a rational hypothesis accidentally mirrored a truth it could not yet see. For others, it is a potential piece of evidence in a much larger puzzle about catastrophic Earth changes and forgotten chapters of human exploration. It forces us to consider a profound question about knowledge itself. Can a truth about our planet be preserved not in libraries, but in the very structure of scientific thought, lying dormant in a theory until technology finally reveals the physical proof? Whether a product of brilliant deduction or a faint echo from a pre-glacial world, Buache's map reminds us that the line between a visionary's guess and a forgotten memory can be as thin as the ice that now covers the continent he dared to chart. A heart can hold the shape of a world. In 1531, the French mathematician and cartographer Oronce Finé created a world map of startling beauty and profound mystery. He chose the cordiform projection, a heart shape that was both an artistic flourish and a mathematical innovation, designed to represent the spherical Earth on a flat surface with less distortion. At the bottom of this elegant heart, dominating the southern hemisphere, lies a massive speculative landmass labeled Terra Australis. This was the great southern continent, a theoretical necessity for classical geographers who believed the lands of the north must be balanced by an equal weight in the south to keep the world from tipping over. Yet when you look closely at Finé's depiction, something curious emerges. The coastline of this imagined continent is not a smooth, generic curve. It is indented with deep bays, inlets, and what appear to be river estuaries, features that give it an unexpected, almost realistic texture. It looks less like a geometric placeholder and more like an actual coastline someone might have sketched from a ship's deck. This detail has puzzled historians for generations. Finé was a scholar working in Paris, far from any southern ocean. His primary sources were the texts of ancient Greek geographers like Ptolemy, mixed with the latest, though still vague, reports from Portuguese voyages that were pushing ever southward along the African coast. The Portuguese were famously secretive, guarding their charts as national treasures. So how did Finé arrive at such a specific, rugged outline for a continent no European claimed to have seen? Some experts, like the historian John Hessler, suggest Finé may have had indirect access to these closely held Portuguese portolans, or perhaps even to Arab charts that incorporated knowledge from Indian Ocean traders who might have ventured farther south than recorded. These sources could have provided fragmented reports of distant, icy landfalls, snippets of coastline that Finé, bound by his classical belief in a large southern land, then connected into a single, coherent shape. His artistic license filled in the gaps between those whispers, but the whispers themselves may have been real. The map's enduring influence is a testament to its persuasive power. For centuries after, cartographers copied and adapted Finé's Terra Australis, cementing the idea of a fertile, inhabited southern continent in the European imagination, an idea that would drive exploration until Captain Cook finally disproved it in the 1770s. This beautiful heart-shaped map sits at a perfect crossroads. It is a work of art, a product of mathematical theory, and a potential vessel for lost data. It forces us to ask a critical question about all early maps. Where does the art end and the evidence begin? When a cartographer draws a river inlet on a speculative coast, is it merely decoration to please the eye, or is it the careful transcription of a detail from a worn, secret chart lying on his desk? In the Renaissance mind, beauty, theory, and empirical observation were not separate pursuits. They were woven together into a single quest for understanding. The truth, it seems, could be hidden just as effectively within the graceful lines of an artistic convention as it could be in the stark notations of a sailor's logbook. Finé's map challenges us to look deeper, to see the possible fingerprint of a real discovery left in the margins of a beautiful, theoretical dream. The beauty of a theoretical heart shape gives way to the stark, confident lines of a map that seems to defy its own time. In 1559, an Ottoman cartographer named Hadji Ahmed produced a world map that is a cartographic thunderbolt. Its depiction of the Americas is not the clumsy, distorted landmass seen in many European maps of the era. It is startlingly modern. The continents are rendered with accurate relative proportions, and the connection between North America and Asia is shown with a clarity that suggests a global, rather than a purely Atlantic, viewpoint. Most striking of all is its treatment of the western coast of North America. It shows California not as an island, a persistent and famous error that would plague maps for another century, but correctly as a peninsula. This was a detail European cartographers would not consistently get right for generations. How could a mapmaker working in the Ottoman Empire, an ocean away from the Pacific, possess such precise knowledge of a coastline Europeans themselves were still struggling to chart? The Hadji Ahmed map forces us to look beyond the familiar narrative of European exploration. Its sophistication implies access to sources outside the Portuguese and Spanish spheres of control. Scholars have long pondered the origins of its data. One compelling theory points east along the Silk Road. Could Ahmed have been working from Chinese maps, transmitted through the vast networks of trade and diplomacy that connected the Ottoman Empire to Ming China? Chinese maritime knowledge, exemplified by the earlier voyages of the treasure fleets under Admiral Zheng He, was extensive, though largely withdrawn by this time. Fragments of that knowledge, perhaps world maps or coastal charts, could have traveled westward and found their way to a curious scholar in Istanbul. Another, even more speculative, idea considers the possibility of maps derived from pre-Columbian sources. Were there indigenous maps of the Pacific coast, drawn on hides or woven into textiles, that entered the stream of global trade through early and unrecorded contacts? The map's very style supports this idea of a synthesized worldview. It blends Islamic cartographic traditions with elements that feel entirely alien to them, resulting in a unique hybrid that looks like no other map from any culture. This leads us to a profound reflective question. What if the Age of Discovery was not a European monologue, but merely one loud voice in a much older, global conversation? Maps like Ahmed's hint at a silent trade in geographical knowledge that flowed across continents long before Magellan's voyage. A commerce of ideas where a sketch from a Chinese navigator or an indigenous chart could, through countless hands and translations, eventually influence an Ottoman draftsman. It challenges the Eurocentric story by suggesting that the true map of the world was being pieced together from many corners of the earth, and that the complete picture, lost to us now, may have been far more interconnected than our history books allow. The Hadji Ahmed map is a ghostly echo of that lost global understanding, a single page from a much larger atlas of human curiosity that has since been scattered to the winds. Far from the Ottoman court, in the scholarly halls of 15th century Korea, a different vision of the world was being meticulously drawn. The Kangnido map, created in the year 1402, is a masterpiece of ink and silk that shatters our timeline of geographical awareness. Here, decades before Portuguese caravels began probing the west coast of Africa, this Korean map presents a full and recognizable outline of the entire African continent, complete with a distinct southern cape. Europe appears as a small, stylized cluster of peninsulas in the upper left, and Arabia is prominently placed at the center, reflecting the map's diverse intellectual heritage. This is not a map of speculation, it is a map of synthesis, weaving together Chinese administrative surveys, Islamic celestial diagrams, and Korean scholarly precision into the most advanced world picture of its age. Its very existence poses a quiet but monumental challenge to the traditional narrative. How could Korean scholars, a world away, know the shape of Africa so long before the Europeans who claim its discovery? The answer lies in the vast, interconnected channels of knowledge that thrived under the Mongol Empire. For over a century, the Pax Mongolica had secured trade routes stretching from the Mediterranean to the Sea of Japan. Along these silk roads moved not just silks and spices, but scholars, diplomats, and ideas. Islamic geographers, building on centuries of travel and trade across the Indian Ocean, had developed remarkably accurate concepts of Africa's form. Their knowledge, likely in the form of maps or detailed written descriptions, traveled eastward. In Korea, under the scholarly Joseon dynasty, this imported Islamic cartography was blended with detailed Chinese maps that excelled in depicting their own region and the lands to their west. The Korean cartographers acted as master editors, reconciling these different sources into a single, coherent image. The Kangnido's depiction of Africa is its most stunning feature. The continent bulges correctly in the west, tapers to a point in the south, and even suggests the Horn of Africa extending eastward. This suggests the mapmakers were working from sources that understood Africa was a continent surrounded by water, a concept European maps would not fully embrace for another 80 years. It forces us to reimagine the flow of information. Discovery was not a single light bulb switching on in one part of the world. It was a slow dawn, with different cultures holding different pieces of the puzzle. A Moroccan traveler's account in Cairo could become data for a Persian scholar, whose work might eventually be copied and interpreted by a Chinese envoy, and finally rendered onto silk by a Korean court artist. The Kangnido map is a physical testament to that long, collaborative awakening. It asks us to consider a profound shift in perspective. What Europe called the Age of Discovery was, from this East Asian viewpoint, perhaps merely the moment when one part of the world finally accessed and acted upon knowledge that another part had already held for generations. The map reminds us that the shape of the world was not discovered. It was gradually assembled through a silent, global conversation we are only now beginning to hear. Centuries before Kangnido, a different kind of map was being imagined from a library in Alexandria. The work of Claudius Ptolemy, a 2nd-century scholar, formed the very bedrock of Western cartography, yet his original maps vanished into history. For over 1,000 years, his text, the Geographia, survived only as a set of complex instructions and coordinates, a puzzle without its picture. Then, in the 15th century, as the Renaissance reawakened interest in classical learning, European scholars attempted to solve it. Using his meticulous data, they began to draw the world anew, producing stunning reconstructions like the famous 1482 Ulm edition. These were not copies of a lost map. They were modern interpretations of an ancient mathematical system, and they presented a world far larger than the Roman Empire Ptolemy knew. His map stretched eastward to the Malay Peninsula and the Gulf of Thailand, lands the Romans had only heard of through trade. To the south, it postulated a vast, unknown land encircling the Indian Ocean, the Great Terra Australis Incognita. This creates a fascinating paradox. These Renaissance editions, drawn with fresh ink, are filled with ancient data. They show a world that medieval Europe had largely forgotten, a world that the age of exploration would soon rush to encounter. How could Ptolemy, working in the 2nd century, have possessed such extensive knowledge of Southeast Asia? His methods provide a clue. Ptolemy was a compiler and a mathematician, not an explorer. He gathered every travelogue, merchant's log, and military report available in the Great Library of Alexandria. His sources were the accumulated knowledge of the Hellenistic world, which had direct trade links via the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean to ports in India and beyond. Alexandrian merchants and diplomats would have returned with stories, sketches, and sailing times, which Ptolemy then translated into longitudinal and latitudinal coordinates with scientific rigor. Some historians, like Dr. James Romm, suggest his data may even include fragments from now lost accounts of voyages from Indian or Indonesian sailors who possessed intimate knowledge of those eastern seas. This means the Ulm world map, printed on the eve of Columbus's voyage, was in a sense a 1,000-year-old forecast. It presented European navigators with a pre-existing script of the world, one that included places like the Golden Chersonese, which scholars believe refers to the Malay Peninsula. When Da Gama and others finally reached these shores, they were, in a way, arriving at a destination Ptolemy had already mathematically described. This forces a profound reflection on the preservation of knowledge. Ptolemy's work was a time capsule, safeguarding fragments of global geography through the dark ages in the language of numbers and stars. The Renaissance reconstructions were not just rediscovering an ancient map, they were reactivating a dormant data stream, proving that sometimes the most advanced picture of the world is not the newest one, but the oldest one we have finally learned how to read again. A silent island off the coast of Spain held secrets of the sea. In the year 1339, on the island of Majorca, a Jewish cartographer named Angelino Dulcert completed a masterpiece of navigation. His Portolan chart, drawn on a single stretched sheepskin, is a thing of stark, practical beauty. It shows the Mediterranean with the crisp, confident lines of a sailor who knows every cove, its coastlines rendered with an accuracy that feels almost modern. But it is the left edge of the vellum where the map spills into the open Atlantic that holds a quiet mystery. There, clearly marked, lie the Canary Islands. And stretching south along the coast of Africa is a detailed shoreline labeled with names like Caput Finis Gazol, a place scholars believe may refer to the coast of modern-day Mauritania. This presents a chronological puzzle. According to the official chronicles of European exploration, the Canary Islands were not rediscovered until 1341, and systematic mapping of that stretch of West Africa would not begin for another century. Dulcert's chart seems to know the future. This was no theoretical exercise. The Portolan chart was the indispensable tool of medieval Mediterranean mariners. Its genius lay in its method. Starting from a network of compass roses drawn across the parchment, the cartographer would lay down room lines, a spiderweb of courses a ship could sail. Coastlines were then drawn in, annotated with the names of ports, landmarks, and warnings of shallow water, all based on the accumulated, first-hand experience of countless captains. This was empirical knowledge passed from pilot to pilot, refined over generations. The accuracy of the Mediterranean sections proves Dulcert was working from superb, real-world data. So where did his Atlantic data come from years ahead of the official record? Theories point to the unique crossroads that was Majorca. The island was a vibrant center of the Cartographia Mallorquina, a school of Jewish cartographers who served Christian and Muslim patrons alike, synthesizing knowledge from all corners of the known world. Dulcert likely had access to the logs of secretive Genos or Catalan sailors, men who ventured beyond the Pillars of Hercules not for glory, but for profit, fishing or seeking new trade opportunities, their discoveries guarded to protect a commercial advantage. Even more compelling is the potential link to Arab geography. Muslim scholars and navigators had extensive knowledge of the Atlantic coasts, and their works, translated in the multicultural courts of Iberia, could have provided the rough outlines that Dulcert then refined with local sailing reports. This map forces a subtle but important shift in how we see history. It suggests that the frontier of the known world was not a solid wall that moved only when a king sponsored an official expedition. It was more like a fog, perpetually receding at the edges due to the countless, unrecorded voyages of fishermen, traders, and private adventurers. Official history records the moment the fog lifts for everyone, but the cartographers, those quiet synthesizers in their island workshops, were often the first to see the new shapes emerging from the mist. Dulcert's vellum is not just a map, it is a testament to all the journeys that never made it into the chronicles, their only monument a carefully inked coastline on a chart, waiting for the rest of the world to catch up. A perfect circle of vellum held a world suspended in time, created between 1411 and 1415 by a Venetian named Albertin de Virga. This map presents the Earth as a radiant disk, a medieval motif, yet its contents pulse with startlingly modern detail. Inside this symbolic frame, Africa is not a vague shape but a continent defined by interior rivers and named kingdoms, its northern coastline rendered with a precision that speaks of first-hand navigational data. Europe curls around the top with recognizable peninsulas, but it is the bottom of the circle that draws the eye, where a large, speculative southern landmass extends, its coast indented with bays and estuaries much like the Terra Australis on other maps of the era. Once more, the ghost of an unknown continent appears decades, even centuries, before any recorded voyage could have charted it. The map's creator remains as enigmatic as his work. We know only his name and that he was Venetian, a citizen of a republic whose wealth was built on trade secrets and maritime mastery. De Virga's masterpiece is a breathtaking fusion, intertwining the medieval Christian worldview with Jerusalem near the center and paradisiacal imagery, with the cutting-edge practical geography demanded by merchants and sailors. This blend suggests he was not working in an ivory tower, but at a bustling crossroads of information. Scholars analyzing the map see the clear influence of Arab cartography in its treatment of Africa and the Indian Ocean, knowledge that would have flowed into Venice through its extensive trade networks with the Islamic world. Simultaneously, the accurate detailing of the Mediterranean and the Adriatic points to the confidential Portolan charts guarded by Venetian navigators. De Virga acted as a singular filter, weaving these disparate threads, sacred symbolism, Arab science, and Venetian state secrets into a single, cohesive vision. The story of the map's survival is a tragedy in itself. The original De Virga world map is lost, vanished like so much ancient knowledge. What we study today is a single, fragile photographic copy made in the early 20th century before the original disappeared, likely during the turmoil of the Second World War. This haunting absence makes it a powerful symbol for all the cartographic masterpieces that did not endure, burned in library fires, lost in shipwrecks, or simply crumbled to dust from neglect. Each lost map took with it a unique configuration of data, a snapshot of the world as it was understood at a specific moment by a specific mind. De Virga's work forces us to consider the fragile, human chain of transmission. How many other Albertin de Virgas were there, individuals who sat at their desks with a collection of worn charts and travelers' tales, tasked with making sense of a world too large for any one person to know. Their pens were the final link, giving permanent form to whispers from caravans and reports from the crow's nest before those whispers faded forever. In that perfect circle, we see not just a map, but the act of memory itself, a desperate and beautiful attempt to hold the whole world in a single, fleeting glance before it slips away. That fragile chain of memory found its strongest link in the hands of a man who had been there himself. The map drawn by Juan de la Cosa in the year 1500 is a unique treasure, the earliest surviving European cartographic document to unambiguously show the New World. Its creator was no scholar in a distant library. He was Christopher Columbus's own navigator and the owner of his flagship, the Santa Maria. This is not a map of theory or rumor. It is a map drawn in the wake of the waves, its lines etched by the man who helped steer the course of history. The vellum is dominated by a familiar Mediterranean and Atlantic, but to the far left, emerging from the ocean like a revelation, are the islands of the Caribbean, labeled with the names Columbus gave them, Hispaniola and Cuba, rendered with the rough, confident shapes of someone sketching a coastline he has personally traced. Further south, the hump of Brazil and the northern coast of South America appear, documented from the recent voyages of other Spanish and Portuguese captains. Yet within this groundbreaking document of first-hand experience, a profound confusion is frozen in time. Sprinkled across these newfound lands are drawings of European castles and, most tellingly, Asian-style flags. In the mind of de la Cosa and his contemporaries, these lands were not a new continent. They were the outermost reaches of Asia, the Indies they had set out to find. The map perfectly captures the cognitive dissonance of that moment, where radical new observations were being forced into the narrow confines of an ancient worldview. It is a snapshot of understanding in violent transition. Beyond this clear error, the map may hold subtler secrets. Some historians scrutinizing its western edge see tantalizing suggestions, a blank space where the coast of Central America trails off, not as a closed line but as an open possibility. Could this be a silent hint, based on indigenous reports or unexplained currents, that a greater body of water lay just beyond? De la Cosa would have been privy to all the sailors' talk, the rumors and native tales that never made the official logs. His map, therefore, is more than a record of what was seen. It is a repository of what was whispered. This duality makes it a masterclass in reading historical maps. The glorious inaccuracies, like those Asian flags on American shores, are not failures, they are keys. They reveal the powerful grip of pre-existing belief, showing us that discovery is not just about seeing something new, but about struggling to comprehend what it is you are seeing. Every map is a battlefield between observation and expectation, and the Juan de la Cosa map lets us witness that battle at its very beginning. It encourages us to look at all old maps with a dual vision, to appreciate both the bold new lines they draw and the stubborn old ghosts that linger in their parchment, reminding us that every leap forward in knowledge is taken from the solid, and sometimes mistaken, ground of what we think we already know. While de la Cosa sketched a world he thought he knew, across the ocean a king demanded a map of the world he aimed to control. The Miller Atlas of 1519 is not a single chart but a lavish, hand-painted volume, a crown jewel of Portuguese cartography commissioned for King Manuel I. Its pages gleam with gold leaf and vibrant pigments, a visual declaration of imperial power created at the precise moment Ferdinand Magellan was preparing his fleet to circumnavigate the globe. Within its ornate borders lies a map of the Indian Ocean and Southeast Asia of such staggering detail that it whispers of a deeper, older story of trade and travel. The Spice Islands are not vague blobs but distinct archipelagos, their locations plotted with a confidence that suggests more than just recent Portuguese reconnaissance. Cloves and nutmeg trees are illustrated beside bustling ports, revealing an intimate understanding of the source of the wealth that fueled an empire. This precision hints at a profound truth. The Portuguese did not discover this world, they entered it. The map's accuracy in depicting the complex waterways of Indonesia and the coast of India almost certainly relied on knowledge appropriated from the very cultures they sought to dominate. Arab navigational guides known as Romangs, Indian coastal charts, and the practical wisdom of Malay pilots who had sailed these seas for centuries, all of this intelligence was gathered, translated, and compiled into this single, beautiful volume for the king's eyes. As the historian Dr. Catarina Garcia notes, these atlases were the artificial intelligence of their day, sophisticated databases that turned multicultural maritime knowledge into a strategic tool for conquest. The atlas blends this hard-won data with artistic fantasy. In the margins, artists painted vivid scenes of peoples and animals, from dignified kings of African realms to mythical beasts like the manticore. This mix of reportage and imagination reveals the Renaissance mind trying to process an expanding world, where every new account contained both measurable fact and unbelievable wonder. The Miller Atlas forces us to confront a hidden history of global mapping. The lines that gave Europe its geographic advantage were often traced from sources that were then erased from the record. It represents a pivotal moment of appropriation, where a collaborative, centuries-old network of Asian and African geographers and sailors had their collective understanding repackaged under a single European crown, their contributions anonymized by the stroke of a royal cartographer's pen. This magnificent book is therefore a paradox, a masterpiece of human knowledge that also marks the quiet closing of a chapter of open exchange. Its very beauty a monument to the beginning of a world remapped by the ambitions of a single continent. While kings commissioned atlases of conquest, another ruler sought a map of pure understanding. In the year 1154, in the vibrant, multicultural court of King Roger II of Sicily, a masterpiece of medieval science was completed. The Tabula Rogeriana, created by the Arab geographer Al-Idrisi, was not just a map, it was an encyclopedia of the known world, a silver disc of engraved knowledge that represented a summit of human curiosity. Its very first detail challenges our modern perspective. It is oriented with south at the top, a common convention in Islamic cartography that immediately reminds us north is not an inherent up but a cultural choice. On this vast, circular planisphere, the contours of Eurasia and North Africa unfold with a coherence and accuracy that would not be matched in Europe for centuries. The Mediterranean is a recognizable shape, the Arabian Peninsula is carefully defined, and the Indian Ocean opens to the east with a sense of real space. Al-Idrisi did not work from guesswork. For 15 years, he and a team of scholars interviewed travelers, merchants, and diplomats who passed through Roger's cosmopolitan court. They cross-referenced this living knowledge with the works of Greek scholars like Ptolemy, which had been preserved and expanded upon by Islamic academics, while those texts were largely forgotten in the West. The result was a synthesis of ancient theory and cutting-edge reportage. The accompanying text, the Book of Pleasant Journeys into Faraway Lands, reads like a geographical detective's notebook. It describes the British Isles with surprising detail, noting the smoky cities and fertile lands, information gleaned from Norman sailors and traders. Even more astonishingly, it discusses the sources of the Nile, placing them in the mountains of the moon in Central Africa, a concept that would fade from European maps only to be dramatically rediscovered by explorers in the 19th century. This map forces a profound historical reconsideration. At the very moment much of Europe was in what later scholars would call the Dark Ages, the court of a Norman king in Sicily, powered by Islamic scholarship, was producing a vision of the world more advanced than anything seen since antiquity. The Tabula Rogeriana is a powerful testament to how knowledge flows and where it pools. It asks us to look beyond a linear story of progress and see instead a tapestry of brilliance, where different civilizations at different times become the keepers of the flame of understanding. Its survival, while so many other works perished, offers a quiet lesson that the light of discovery has always shone from many directions, and sometimes the clearest view of the world comes from a court where East and West sat at the same table, united by a simple, shared desire to see what was over the horizon. While European courts treasured their illuminated atlases, a map of staggering scale was being unrolled in the halls of the Ming dynasty. The Da Ming Hanyi II, the amalgamated map of the Great Ming, is a breathtaking artifact of cartographic ambition. Created around the year 1389, it stretches over 4 meters in width, a painted panorama on silk that demands to be seen not from above, but as a sweeping landscape. Here, the world unfolds from a distinctly Chinese center, with the empire's provinces rendered in meticulous detail, its rivers and mountains painted with careful brushstrokes. But the map's vision extends far beyond the Middle Kingdom. To the south and west, it depicts the entire coastline of Asia with remarkable accuracy, curving around the Indian subcontinent and reaching down the eastern shore of Africa. Europe appears but as a small, almost insignificant cluster of landforms in the upper left corner, labeled simply as the land of the Franks. This reversal of perspective is its most powerful statement, a complete reorientation of the world's hierarchy long before European maps claimed the central position. This comprehensive view did not emerge from isolation but from profound connection. The map was compiled in the early Ming, just after the collapse of the Mongol Yuan dynasty. For over a century, the Pax Mongolica had unified Eurasia under a single administrative system, enabling an unprecedented flow of people, goods, and information along the Silk Roads. The Ming cartographers were inheritors of this vast, cross-continental knowledge base. They almost certainly had access to Islamic world maps brought by Persian and Arab scholars who served in Mongol courts, maps that carried detailed knowledge of Africa and the Indian Ocean from centuries of Muslim trade and travel. The Da Ming Hanyi II is thus a fusion, blending precise Chinese surveys of their own realm with absorbed geographical intelligence from across the hemisphere. Its primary purpose was administrative and symbolic, used to manage a sprawling empire and to visualize the tributary system, where foreign lands were understood in relation to the Ming emperor. It was a tool of statecraft depicting a vast but ordered world with China firmly at its civilized heart. This magnificent map completely upends the outdated idea of a pre-modern China closed off from the world. It reveals instead a sophisticated, outward-looking geographical tradition that saw its empire not as alone, but as the central node in a web of global connections. The very act of creating such a comprehensive map implies a deep curiosity about distant shores. It asks us to reconsider the pathways of knowledge. Long before Portuguese ships rounded the Cape of Good Hope, detailed information about the shape of Africa was already being studied and painted onto silk in Nanjing. What other understandings, what other maps from this interconnected 14th century world have been lost to time? The Da Ming Hanyi II stands as a silent witness to a moment when the globe was understood through many different lenses, each one reflecting a unique cultural vision of where and what the center of the world truly was. Sometimes the most powerful thing on a map is a mistake. In the year 1424, a Venetian cartographer named Zuane Pizzigano drew a Portolan chart of the Atlantic whose practical lines were interrupted by a cluster of impossible islands. Among them were Antillia and Satanazes, large, rectangular landmasses placed far out in the Western Ocean. These were not vague shapes, they were drawn with the same confident detail as the coasts of Spain or Africa, complete with harbors and place names, as if copied from a sailor's log. Yet no such islands exist there. This chart, created 70 years before Columbus sailed, would plant a seed in the European imagination that grew into a tangible goal for exploration. The islands, particularly Antillia, became entwined with a powerful legend, the story of the 7 cities. This tale spoke of 7 Portuguese bishops who fled the Moorish invasion centuries earlier, sailing west to found 7 wealthy, golden cities on a distant isle. On Pizzigano's chart, Antillia is even marked with 7 bays, a silent nod to the myth. For generations of navigators and monarchs, this was not mere fantasy, it was a destination. Christopher Columbus himself studied such charts and believed in the existence of Antillia, considering it a possible way station on his voyage to Asia. The map did not just record geography, it created it. So where did Pizzigano get these ideas? The most plausible theories point to the unheralded voyages of everyday mariners. Basque whalers and fishermen from Bristol, England, are known to have ventured deep into the North Atlantic in search of cod and whale pods long before official expeditions. These men were not interested in glory or maps, they were interested in fish. If a storm blew one of their vessels far off course, they might have glimpsed the distant shores of Newfoundland or even the Caribbean, returning with tales of lands that, in the retelling back in European taverns, were transformed into the islands of legend. A fog-shrouded coastline seen briefly could become the Isle of Demons or Satanazes. A low-lying archipelago could be remembered as the large, welcoming Antillia. The cartographer, hearing these second-hand reports, would do his professional duty, drawing them as real places with the best information he had. This process reveals the profound psychological engine of discovery. A map filled with hopeful errors created a target. The desire to find the 7 cities, to claim their imagined wealth, provided a financial and emotional reason to sail into the terrifying unknown. The error, therefore, became a self-fulfilling prophecy. Explorers seeking Antillia instead found the Caribbean islands, which we still call the Antilles today. They sought the kingdom of the 7 cities and encountered the pueblos of the American Southwest. The myth, born on a piece of Venetian vellum, directly shaped the course of real history. This forces a beautiful reflection on the nature of knowledge itself. How much of our understanding of the world is built not on cold, hard fact, but on a foundation of hopeful speculation, misinterpreted clues, and stories that we chose to believe were true. The Pizzigano chart reminds us that sometimes you have to sail toward a phantom to find a continent. A perfect circle can hold both heaven and earth. The Bianco world map of 1436, drawn by the Venetian cartographer Andrea Bianco, is a breathtaking fusion of 2 worlds. At first glance, it obeys the old order, a classic circular mappa mundi with Jerusalem at its heart, orbited by the 3 known continents of Europe, Asia, and Africa. But look closer and the practical hand of the sailor takes over. The coastlines are not symbolic curves, they are the crisp, confident lines of a Portolan chart, etched with the names of ports and capes from the Mediterranean to a surprisingly detailed West Africa. This single sheet of vellum is a conversation between faith and fact, where the spiritual diagram of the medieval mind reluctantly makes room for the hard-won data of the rising age of sail. Bianco's depiction of West Africa is its quiet revolution. He shows the continent's northwestern bulge with specific place names and carefully plots the Atlantic archipelagos of the Azores and the Canary Islands. This was knowledge on the cutting edge. These voyages were being spearheaded by the Portuguese under Prince Henry the Navigator, whose ships were cautiously inching down the African coast, mapping as they went in search of gold and a route to the Indies. Buache & Co., working in trade-rich Venice, likely had access to the latest Portuguese charts, perhaps through the city's extensive network of spies and merchants who treated geographical intelligence as a high-value commodity. Yet there may be older whispers in his ink. Some scholars see in his work the possible influence of even earlier Genoese charts, from a time when sailors from that rival republic may have ventured farther than recorded history admits. The map also continues the tradition of the Great Southern Land, labeling a vast terra incognita at the bottom as the Antipodes, the legendary opposite land of classical geography. This was not yet the accurate speculation of a Buache, but the enduring belief in a world balanced by its opposite. This elegant map, therefore, captures a moment of profound transition. The medieval scholar saw the world as a divine creation to be contemplated. The Renaissance navigator saw it as a physical space to be measured and mastered. Andrea Buache stood precisely at that crossroads, his pen serving two masters. He drew the world as a perfect circle of faith, but then filled that circle with the ragged, truthful edges of coastlines reported by men who had been there. It forces us to ask a poignant question about all such transitional works, whose beauty often overshadows their silent testimony. What lost voyages are summarized in a single bay drawn on this map? What unnamed sailor fighting wind and wave finally fixed the position of that cape, only to have his name vanish while his discovery was immortalized by a scholar in a quiet Venetian workshop? These maps are the gravestones of forgotten courage, their elegant lines the only monument to 1,000 journeys that history never wrote down, but geography could not forget. The pen that drew the world for a king could also sketch it for a sultan. As the 17th century unfolded, the Ottoman Empire, though no longer the unchallenged naval power of the Mediterranean, remained a vital crossroads of global information. In its capital of Istanbul, scholars and officials keenly observed the shifting world, translating European discoveries into a framework their own culture could understand. Maps like those created by the polymath Katip Sele stand as magnificent testaments to this ongoing exchange, offering a distinctively Ottoman vision of the newly revealed Americas. These were not mere copies of Portuguese or Spanish charts. They were thoughtful adaptations where the coastlines of Brazil and Florida were carefully inscribed within the elegant curves of Arabic script and the traditional divisions of the Islamic cosmological worldview. The lands were often labeled with notes on their potential, brief annotations on resources like timber or silver, or descriptions of the peoples who lived there, turning the map into both a geographical document and a concise report for the imperial elite. This cartographic synthesis reveals Istanbul's role as a premier intelligence hub of the early modern period. News from Spanish galleons, reports from Venetian merchants, and knowledge from overland Silk Road travelers all converged in its bustling ports and scholarly circles. A mapmaker like Katip Sele acted as a filter for this flood of information, evaluating sources, reconciling conflicting reports, and presenting a coherent picture to an audience that needed to comprehend global shifts in power and commerce. His world map, part of a larger geographical work, served to educate and inform, ensuring the Ottoman leadership was not left behind in the new global conversation, even as the empire's own outward exploration waned. These Ottoman maps of America prompt a deeper reflection on the universality of the mapping impulse. From the Korean Kangnido to the Venetian Portolan, from the Chinese Daming Han Yi Tu to these Islamic adaptations, every advanced culture, when confronted with new geographical knowledge, performed the same essential act. They took the raw data of discovery and translated it into the language of their own understanding, fitting new continents into existing systems of knowledge, faith, and power. Mapping was never a neutral act of copying. It was always an act of interpretation. The Ottoman maps remind us that the New World was not just discovered by Europe. It was simultaneously explained, categorized, and made meaningful by observers across the globe, each from their own unique vantage point in the vast, interconnected web of human curiosity. A globe is a world you can hold in your hands. To conclude our journey through 20 ancient maps, we turn to the revolutionary work of Johannes Schörner, a German mathematician and astronomer who, in the early 1500s, crafted a series of exquisite terrestrial globes. These were not just decorative objects, they were dynamic models of the cosmos, and they contained predictions that would soon be proven true in the most dramatic fashion. Most astonishingly, Schörner's globes from 1515 and 1520 show a narrow, navigable strait slicing through the southern tip of South America, a passage we know today as the Strait of Magellan. The problem is, Ferdinand Magellan would not discover and sail through that strait until 1520, years after Schörner had already drawn it. Furthermore, Schörner's globes label the new southern continent clearly as America and depict a vast, separate terra australis to the south. How was this possible? Schörner was a man of theory, not a sailor. He worked from his study using mathematical principles, astronomical calculations, and the latest geographical reports circulating among European scholars. Some of those reports were almost certainly leaks from the secretive Portuguese and Spanish courts, whispers of voyages that had glimpsed southern passages or heard indigenous tales of a great sea to the west. Schörner took these fragments of data and, with a theorist's boldness, connected the dots. He reasoned that if America was a continent separate from Asia, as the Waldseemüller map had proposed, then there must be a way around it or through it to reach the Spice Islands. His depiction of the strait was a brilliant piece of cartographic deduction. When Magellan's expedition finally battled through that treacherous, storm-racked channel, they were, in a very real sense, sailing into a space that Schörner's mind had already conceived. His globes also solidified the identity of the New World, firmly attaching the name America to the landmass and perpetuating the dream of a great southern continent. This final map, or rather model, brings our entire exploration full circle, perfectly encapsulating the tension between theoretical prediction and empirical discovery that has haunted every chart we have examined. Schörner did not discover the Strait of Magellan, he predicted it. He did not explore America, he defined it from afar. His work forces upon us a profound and unsettling question. How much of what we call the Age of Discovery was, in fact, an age of rediscovery? How many of those brave captains sailing into the unknown were actually being guided, however indirectly, by fragments of ancient wisdom, by theoretical models, by lost charts, or by compiled knowledge that had slowly filtered through the centuries? The 20 maps we have journeyed through are not merely errors or curiosities. They are evidence of a deep, persistent, and often hidden current of geographical awareness that flowed beneath the official narratives. From the Piri Reis fragment to the Kangnido, from the speculative heart of Oronce Finé to the predicted strait on Schörner's globe, they suggest our ancestors' understanding of the world was far more nuanced, interconnected, and in some ways more accurate than we have given them credit for. They challenge the simple story of a dark map slowly being filled with light. Instead, they paint a picture of a flickering torch of knowledge, sometimes burning bright, sometimes dimming to an ember, but never completely going out, passed from hand to hand, culture to culture, and century to century, until finally, the moment came to set sail and see for oneself if the old maps were true. These maps collectively whisper a question that is far larger than any single coastline. If so many charts contain impossible knowledge, could there be a unifying explanation, a lost chapter in human history that accounts for these scattered clues? Stepping back from the individual mysteries, we enter the realm of overarching theories, where scholars and researchers propose bold narratives to connect these cartographic dots. One compelling idea is the concept of a pre-Columbian global exploration network. This theory suggests that long before the age of Columbus and da Gama, advanced maritime cultures undertook voyages of astonishing reach. The Phoenicians, legendary traders of the ancient Mediterranean, are often cited as prime candidates, possessing shipbuilding skills that could have taken them across the Atlantic. Similarly, the Minoans of Bronze Age Crete, with their sophisticated seafaring culture, are imagined as potential global navigators. Proponents like the historian Charles Hapgood argued that these journeys, now lost to official history, left behind fragmented geographical knowledge that was preserved in royal libraries and later copied by Renaissance mapmakers who no longer understood its source. Hapgood took this further, examining the Piri Reis and Buache maps and proposing a radical mechanism for how ancient coastal data could be preserved, the theory of crustal displacement. This idea suggests that the Earth's outer shell can shift dramatically over geologic time, moving entire continents to new latitudes. In this view, a map showing an ice-free Antarctica might not be a fantasy, but an accurate depiction of the continent as it was positioned thousands of years ago before a catastrophic shift buried it in ice. The maps then would be literal snapshots of a lost world. These are thrilling, expansive ideas that capture the imagination, painting a picture of a forgotten epoch of discovery. Yet, the mainstream academic community approaches them with deep skepticism. Conventional scholarship offers a different, more incremental explanation. It emphasizes the incredible power of cumulative knowledge, the slow, patient accumulation of data from countless unrecorded voyages by fishermen, traders, and adventurers. A strange coastline on a map might not be from a single lost civilization, but from 100 minor journeys whose reports were pooled over centuries. Furthermore, scholars point to the high probability of lucky errors and creative misinterpretation. A cartographer might connect disparate reports incorrectly, or interpret a symbolic illustration on an older map as a literal coastline, accidentally creating an accurate shape through a series of misunderstandings. The tale of the 7 cities born from a mapmaker's error shows how powerfully a mistake can shape reality. So how do we navigate between these radical and conventional views? The key is to weigh the evidence without letting wonder override rigor. The radical theories often rely on a small number of anomalous artifacts, extrapolating a grand narrative from fragile evidence. The conventional view, while sometimes less thrilling, is built on a vast foundation of documented trade, cultural exchange, and the proven human capacity for gradual, collaborative discovery. The true value of this debate may not lie in proving one side definitively right, but in the questions it forces us to ask. The enduring mystery of these maps, regardless of its ultimate source, is a powerful engine for inquiry. It drives historians to look closer at neglected sources, archaeologists to reconsider old sites, and all of us to question the neat timelines we have been taught. Whether the answer is a lost civilization or 1,000 forgotten fishermen, the maps have done their most important work. They have reminded us that history is not a closed book, but a living puzzle, and that the past always holds more secrets than we have yet found the courage to seek. Our journey across these 20 maps leaves us not with a single answer, but with a deeper, more resonant question about the nature of discovery itself. We have seen coastlines drawn centuries too early, continents named before they were officially found, and speculative lines that later proved true. These are not mere errors or lucky guesses, they are echoes. They are the faint, persistent signals of a conversation about our planet that has been going on far longer than our textbooks admit. A conversation spoken in the language of vellum and ink, whispered from one culture to the next across mountains and seas. The true story these maps tell is not of a sudden light switching on in the 15th century, but of a slow, flickering dawn that illuminated different parts of the globe at different times, its light sometimes fading but never fully extinguished. The ice-free Antarctica, the pre-Columbian Vinland, the African coast on a Korean silk map, each one is a breach in the wall of conventional history, a glimpse into a world where knowledge flowed along routes we have since forgotten. They challenge the very linearity of progress, suggesting instead a cyclical pattern of remembering and forgetting, of discovery, loss, and partial recovery. This is why they hold such enduring power. They force us to remain humble. They remind us that our current understanding of the past is a best-fit model, a narrative woven from the evidence that has survived, but always vulnerable to a new fragment of parchment emerging from a library vault. Every map, as we have seen, is a fusion, a blend of hard-won empirical data and the cultural dreams of its maker. It is both a scientific document and a work of imagination, a record of what was seen and a vision of what might be. The speculative southern continent was a dream that drove exploration for 300 years. The phantom islands of the Atlantic were mistakes that nonetheless guided ships toward real shores. In this way, the dream itself became a catalyst for reality. So what do we do with these mysteries? We let them unsettle us. We let them expand our sense of what is possible in the human story. We use them not to build altars to lost civilizations, but to sharpen our curiosity, to look more carefully at the gaps and silences in the official record. The invitation these maps extend is to become better listeners to the past, to hear the whispers in the parchment. Which of these 20 windows into lost knowledge speaks most powerfully to you? Does the stolen precision of the Cantino Planisphere capture the thrill of espionage and instant discovery, or does the theoretical courage of the Waldseemüller map, naming a new world and imagining an ocean, inspire a sense of intellectual adventure? The conversation continues below, and your perspective adds to this ongoing exploration. For more journeys into the places where history and mystery meet, consider joining us further. The map is never truly complete, and the next discovery, perhaps waiting in an attic or a digital archive, might once again redraw the boundaries of what we think we know.